Great. If not, that's cool too. We're a nice small group. We'll get to discuss. Very informal today. So yeah, thanks for all that intro. We're gonna just dive right in. I don't have any relevant disclosures. My opinions are my own. We're gonna do some Slido as well as speaking up. And the reason for this is Slido is one of those audience interaction systems. So if you have a mobile device, great. If you don't, and you want to just open a web browser, you can participate that way too. But the reason we're going to do that, even though we're a small group, is that some of leadership is reflecting on yourself and your own style. And sometimes folks don't feel entirely comfortable sharing that with a group. And so the anonymity of Slido is actually really valuable to us. In some ways today. So we're going to do a mix, and they'll be peppered throughout. If you have stuff you want to ask, questions, just raise a hand, throw it in the chat. I'll try and keep an eye on all that stuff. And if I'm missing something, feel free to just interrupt me. Very much want the session to be for you and helpful in some way. So our objectives today, we're going to talk about types of teams and team leadership. We're going to compare and contrast some approaches to leading teams. And then we'll just talk through some of the common team leadership challenges, mostly around how you build a team, who's on the team, and how do you manage conflict and stuff like that. There's so much about leadership. We could spend days talking about all of it, which of course we don't have. So we're going to be focused today, but also try and connect you to some resources so you can learn more, and always happy to continue the conversation offline. So we're going to start with a Slido. So go ahead and grab your device. If you can scan the QR code, great. If you don't have that ability, or if you're on your mobile device now and so you can't use it to scan a QR code, no problem. You can just open a web browser, and you can also go to slido.com and then put in the 7-digit code. And as you know, with these systems, once you've signed up once, you don't need to do it again. The web page should just automatically update for the next questions that come down the road. So this one, very straightforward. Beyond clinical teams, do you have experience leading other types of teams? So all of us are clinicians, presumably work with teams pretty regularly. But beyond that, what do you have experience leading other types of teams? So I'll just give folks a moment to scan and get in and answer it. Great, thank you. Awesome. I see 2 people voted, so we'll give a moment. And Mike Cruz joining us from Idaho, which is awesome. Great, that's 4 folks. And I think minus me and Daniela, we've now got 6. We've got 5, and I think Mike just joined. Hey, Mike, nice to see you. And feel free to join in the Slido if you want. There'll be opportunities on the subsequent Slido slides to join in. So that's great. Thank you. So most people have some sort of experience, mostly with other, less with education, QI operations, or research. And I'm just curious, anybody that answered other, if you could just unmute and give me some sense of what other means, what sort of teams you're thinking about.
I can share. I wrote other, I was the director of a community student organization in medical school that did some research, but I wasn't really the faculty mentor who was leading the research portion of it. It was more of like, facilitating communication and running all the meetings for that organization.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So community-based work. That's great. Anybody else?
I had another life as a mom, and I was a school board. I was on the school board of my kids' independent school, and I led a lot of teams there. I led the governance committee there, and many other finance related to the school boards.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Totally cool. And I think hopefully what you'll see, the stuff we're talking about today, although I'm doing it in the context of academic medicine and trying to make it relevant to our shared professional experience, really these leadership things are generalizable and apply to all those contexts. So I'm sure that for all of you that have worked or done leadership in other settings, you're seeing ways that connects to your work now. So we'll talk about that. But this is great, very helpful. Thank you. We are, by the way, going to mostly be talking about the non-clinical types of leadership today, although again, the principles sort of align with the clinical piece as well. And then I'm curious here, another Slido here, so your device should just update. You shouldn't have to rescan the code, but in a word, or maybe 2 words, when you think about leading a team, how does that make you feel? Like, just what's the emotion or feeling that comes up for you? And you can put in, if you have multiple words or multiple feelings, you can put in subsequent ones, and we'll just build a little bit of a word cloud here. But what are some of the things that come up for you? Where are you with this? Anxious, yes. Well, you come to the right place. A little nervous, responsibility, yep. Great. I see some folks typing, so we'll just give it a minute. Humbled, excited. Yeah. Meaningful, boss role. Yes. Make, that's awesome. I see someone still typing, so we'll just give them a second. You know, I think that it's pretty common to have a wide variety of feelings with team leadership. And so that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. I think it's actually a great place to be where we're feeling all of these. I see 2 humbled showed up here, and I know that's one of my major takeaways from trying to be leading teams over the years is to be humble. So I think you guys are all in a great place, and this is just helpful in giving me a sense of how you're feeling and some of the things we might be attending to today. So thank you. That's great. And it's natural to feel, of course, a whole bunch of ways about team leadership. So now, rather than Slido, since those might have been harder to share as sort of a bigger, with other colleagues, I'm curious, what is it that in particular that you guys are finding or find challenging about leading a team, or that you're worried about when you say you're anxious? And maybe a related question to that, maybe it's easier to answer the related question, is what would help you feel more comfortable? What would actually help you move to that next stage that you're hoping to move to? And we're such a small group, I don't even know you need to raise a hand, but feel free to just unmute yourself and just chat. Lady?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about when leading a team and you want to give feedback to the people that you work with. It's like you don't want to hurt their feelings, but you want to give your feedback as to the best of your ability. So I think for me, it's a question of, finding that balance of telling the person the truth and not hurting their feelings at the same time. So I think for me, that's my biggest challenge about just going to the point.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's great. I agree, and that can be very challenging. I'm not sure we'll talk about that specific thing a lot today, but I do have some resources for you that we'll talk about later about ways to learn more about that. And I think that skill is useful no matter the type of team that we're thinking about, whether it's clinical or not. And so maybe that will come up as we talk through some of the other things later today. Who else? Hey, Lindsay.
Hello. I was trying to put this into words, but I think it's probably having like multiple competing demands, both on like my bandwidth and on the team, and trying to figure out how to keep myself organized and how to, I guess, maybe kind of zoom in and out on those demands. Like, what's most important right now? How do I still move forward towards something that might be important in the future? And that's a lot to keep track of.
Yes, it is indeed, and always a challenge. So yeah, I'll think hopefully some of the stuff that we think about today begins to give some frameworks for how you sort of might think about some of that stuff. So a lot of prioritization of tasks, one's own and one's team are pretty contextual, right? And they depend on the specific topic. We're going to talk about sort of some high level stuff that might be helpful. And then if we haven't gotten to it, please flag me and we'll try and address it along the way. Anyone else?
Hi all. I don't know if I know any of you guys. My name is Mike Krug. I'm out in Boise, Idaho at UW Boise. I would say, the meetings where it's just idea generation, I find those like invigorating even, I would say, but the meetings where I need others to do things also, I find the motivational interview, like how to motivate others to be an active part of this or get tasks done or do what the group thinks it is challenging sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Mike. Nice to see you, by the way. Yeah, I think it's always fun to be brainstorming with people, right? Idea generation and just sort of chatting about how we could do things. But when it gets down to brass tacks and what are we actually going to do, and how is it that I as a team leader don't end up with all the tasks on my list and nobody else has anything else to do. And sort of how do we, but also not delegating everything and feeling like we're just telling other people to do work. So that is a perpetual challenge for sure. We'll try and talk about that a little bit today as well. Good. Anything else?
I was going to say it's hard to make sure that every person on the team feels like they are an integral part of the team with a really valuable role that makes the team better, rather than just being the boss all the time and telling people what to do. A team is better if everybody feels like they're really important and a contributor.
For sure. Thank you. Yeah, and I totally agree. And it's good, actually. I think one of the things we're going to spend most of our time talking about today and really asking you guys to think aloud about it is, how do you build a team? Like, who's on the team? Who composes the team? And I think for a lot of the things you guys have raised around how do we give feedback, how do we balance our demands, how do we delegate, especially because delegation is one way to handle when the workload is high, and how do we make people feel like they belong on the team? A lot of that starts with who is going to be on the team and how do we pick them and select them, and if we can't change who's on the team, how can we manage that? So we're gonna talk about that a lot, and hopefully that gets to a lot of what you guys are asking about. Anything else? Okay, great. And if anything comes up, awesome. This is, by the way, the first time we're doing this session, so part of this is me learning what's going to be useful to you all, and we'll go from there. So good. So this is our outline for today. This is what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about types of teams, approaches to leadership, how important it is to what I would say call know thyself, and what I mean by that. And a lot of this, I think, is going to help you when giving feedback, for example. Being in touch with yourself and your role as a leader and how you feel about it is going to help a lot of that. It's going to be an important foundation. Then we'll touch on some key teamwork skills and frameworks at a pretty high level, but I want to make sure that they're in your heads as things that are out there that may be useful to you. We'll talk a little bit about what makes for high functioning teams and how do you build and guide a team is really where I think we'll spend most of our time. And then we'll end with sort of 5 ways to become a better team leader. They're not the top 5 ways. I'm sure there are many other ways. These are just 5 that I think I found useful. And I think they'll resonate with some of the things you guys have brought up. So that's where we're going to go. So types of teams, and again, I alluded to this at the beginning. We are all part of clinical teams, some teaching, some attending only. We're also part of care coordination teams, of course, and these principles really can help with all of those things. But a lot of what we're going to talk about today are other kinds of teams in the academic medical environment, so operational or administrative, educational, and research. And of course, each of those comes in different flavors. And some of them are within our sort of own locus, others are much broader across the system, and some may be beyond healthcare or beyond our healthcare system, right? If we're part of professional societies or other things. And for those of you that noted experiences outside of healthcare, I think, you know, whether it's managing your home team with your family, or if it's, you know, some community related team, a lot of this I think will apply. So that's sort of what we're thinking about today, team-wise. What does it take to lead teams? Now, there are a lot of different ways to think about this. There's not one right way. I'm going to share a bunch of perspectives on sort of ways to conceptualize this, which I think are useful as you begin to think about building your own toolkit of skills and qualities that help you become a better leader. We all have a toolkit, and by virtue of being here, you all have, you know, many of these things, or have developed them, or are looking to develop them more. We all need a toolkit. It's really important to develop those skills, and it never really ends, right? This is just part of our career, our professional development. We always can be better at a lot of these things. So we need that. But at the same time, I think we need some systems, processes, and approaches to actually apply to use those skills and qualities to most effectively lead teams. And that's really this idea of a conceptual roadmap. And some of what I'll share with you today are some conceptual roadmaps to think about leadership, to think about teams, and try and meld all those things together. And so hopefully that gives you some structure within which to use the skills and qualities that you develop simultaneously. Another way to think about team leadership is really thinking about the types of work that you're doing. And I like to think about this as sort of outer work and inner work. And outer work, I think, is the work of leadership that is often really visible because it's external, right? We are going out and talking to people, we're gathering their stories, we're gathering data, we're observing how people react when we share information or ideas with them. Do they like the idea? Do they think it's terrible? Do they want to try something else? That's important information for us to know. We're doing public speaking, maybe in front of a group of people. We may be running meetings. We may be guiding in the background the team and stakeholders. All of that's really important. We got to be doing that well. But I think a lot of that is underpinned by inner work. And inner work is some of what we'll talk about today, but that's really the work that you as a leader have to do internally to be able to be effective with all of your outer work. And that's recognizing what you and other people are feeling. And Lady, I think to your point around feedback, this is a lot of understanding how to give feedback, is getting some sense of what emotions are coming up for you and what's happening for that other person and how might they react to whatever information is that you want to share with them. You also want to understand why you and others feel the way you do, not just that we're anxious or frustrated or annoyed or whatever it might be, but why, the underlying why. And that's often harder to get to. There are lots of ways to explore that, but it's a really important intentional step to be making. Another, I think, is interpreting data and making meaning of it. So when we get information, whether it's stories or data, we actually have to really sit with that for a little while and make something of it. We can't, we have to sort of, what is this data telling us? What are the messages that are coming from this, and how do we communicate around those? The next bullet point on here is preparing yourself and organizing your thoughts. For me, I know that's one of the things I constantly work on. If I come to a meeting or to leading a team and I haven't thought ahead of time a little bit about what it is I want to do, a lot of the times I end up down a path that I didn't really want to go down, or I'm not able to succinctly say what it is that I think should happen, or I'm not able to guide the team through the challenge because I'm actually experiencing it at the same time that they are. So I need a little bit of prep work, a little bit of me time to think through what is it that I think we need to be doing here as a team. And it doesn't mean I know the answer or the right way, but at least I've organized my thinking so that when I'm speaking with others, I'm a little bit more put together. And then lastly, we all have biases and tendencies as humans. And we'll talk about this when you're building a team, but being able to question your biases and tendencies is really important. And that's part of why building a team intentionally is so critical. You need people on your team who help balance or question your biases and balance your tendencies. And so that's why being intentional is a really important piece of things. So there's a lot, there's sort of both sides here. Another way that people often talk about leadership that you may have seen is sort of, who are you as a leader and how do you relate to other people? And there are a whole host, there's like alphabet soup of leadership styles out there. And we're not going to get into these today. Again, people spend careers talking about and studying these things, all different kinds that you may have seen. When you start out as a leader, some people are a laissez-faire leader. They basically say, well, I'm going to cross fingers and hope that this leadership thing goes well, and we'll just see. Whereas others are much more directive, right? And they actually learn what they need to learn is to step back a little bit more. And so there's all different styles. And if you're not sure where your style is, that's totally okay. But I do think it's helpful to think about it a little bit. And I'm actually going to ask you on the next slide to, if you can, venture a guess. If you were to describe your leadership style in a word or two, how would you describe it? And it's totally okay if you don't have a way that you've been thinking about it. You can just say you don't know. Totally fine. But and again, it'll be anonymous, but it's just getting to sort of think about that, knowing what your strengths are and where you may have opportunity for improvement. So leadership style is one thing. Conflict management, I'm guessing many of you have heard of these types of conflict management or approaches to conflict management before. I know that I do not like conflict, so I generally try to avoid it. And then when I'm forced to deal with it, I choose one of these other styles. That's my usual way. But no, being aware of your conflict management style, being aware of your tendencies is really important so that you can balance them appropriately. So again, I'll ask you guys about that too on the slide on the coming page. So think a little bit about that piece. Personality, you've all heard of Myers-Briggs and Enneagrams, presumably. There are other personality assessments out there. They have some worth, maybe how scientific they are, I don't know. There are free versions on the web if you want to take them if you haven't before. But again, having some sense of your style. For example, having taken the Myers-Briggs over the years, I've learned I'm an introvert, right? And so I actually need a fair amount of alone time. And that's part of why it's so important to me to collect my thoughts before I go and speak with other people. Understanding that helped me adjust my leadership style and helped me adjust how I interact with other people. So it's not that one is better or worse than another, it's just learning how to manage it. And then those of you that have been in leadership roles may have heard of what's called a 360-degree evaluation, or a 360 eval, as it's sometimes called. And that's a formal, structured way to solicit feedback from the people around you that you work with. A little bit out of scope for today, but it's yet another way to learn how you relate to other people and how they perceive you as a leader. A very powerful tool for those of you that are in leadership roles. All right, so I'm going to ask you on this next slide here, 3 things, and you can just put it into your one response, just separate by commas. How would you describe your leadership style? How would you describe your approach to conflict management? And how would you describe your personality? So for example, you could say, I have adaptive leadership style, I'm avoidant, and I'm an introvert, or something like that. And it's obviously totally okay if you don't know or you're unsure, you can just write DK. And again, this is all anonymous, so so no need to out yourself here if you don't feel comfortable. But just curious, where are you with this? Is this stuff that you've thought about? Do you feel like you have good awareness, or is it something that maybe could be future work? We'll give folks a moment. Adaptive, accommodating introvert. Nice. Optimizing, adaptive. Great. Nice. That's great. I expect we're going to see a diversity of where people are with things, which is good. Collaborative, extrovert. Excellent. Affiliative, compromising, extrovert. Nice. That's great. A couple more people typing. I'm impressed with how many of you got some sense of this. I think if someone showed me that list of leadership things, I'd be like, I don't know. I don't know which one of those I am. Accommodating, compromising, introvert, evolving, yep, and adaptive, compromising, introvert. That's fantastic. Yeah, thanks, guys. So that's good. It sounds like you have a lot of really good awareness in this space, which is fantastic. I think that probably didn't used to be the case for a lot of leaders, but I think maybe we're a different generation, our peer group, and grew up in a space where we're more in touch with this stuff. So that's fantastic. So thanks. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And again, I think keeping that all in mind, these are your tendencies, right? These are where you go when it gets stressful or when it gets difficult. And so if you're anticipating that part of leading a team is going to be difficult for you, you know what your tendency is going to be, whether that's giving feedback or figuring out how to delegate something. And you can try and balance that with some other strategies as you move through leadership. So good to have some awareness. Doesn't mean that you're these things all the time or every time, but they are your tendencies when you get stressed. Good. So knowing thyself, and we'll sort of pull pieces from that in a little bit as we go along. But we're going to talk a little bit now about key teamwork skills and frameworks. And again, this is meant to be sort of just be aware of the kind of stuff that's out there that might be useful as you conceptualize ways to attack the challenges you all identified going forward. So we're going to start by asking you, when you think of the lowest performing team of which you're a member, to rate it. So 1 is bad or poor, 5 is great, and write one thing that you find challenging about that team. So what is it that's difficult? Is it that it's super inefficient, or people are just mean to each other, or it's just not fun, or what is it that happens? It could be any kind of team. You can pick a clinical one if you want. You can also pick some other kind of team that you're part of. Yeah, that's a big one, right? We try and have team events, team meetings, or whatever it might be, and people just can't show up because they're too busy. There are not clear ground rules or protocols established. Yes, so we haven't actually organized ourselves as how we're going to work together as a team. Or if there's a lot of meeting time, but not productive action. And yeah, that's my personal hell, I think, is meetings where I feel like the 1 hour meeting could have been condensed to 5 minutes. Drives me nuts. I hear you on that one. And teamwork is lost. Yeah. When we're just not, we're just not going anywhere. We're kind of aimless in what we're trying to do. So yeah, that's great. And good. Okay, so maybe you've had the lowest performing your team has actually been a great team. That's awesome. I think that's great if you haven't had to experience bad teams. And if everyone's avoidant, then no productive dialogue happens about differences. So yes, agreed. And if they're prioritizing something else, yeah, really important pieces of things. So thank you. Yeah. So now we're going to do this opposite. So think of the highest performing team you're part of and just what makes that really good. And maybe it's just the opposite of what you just said. So if there's a lack of roles or clear expectations, it's that everyone has clear roles or expectations. Maybe it's something else. Yeah. We're going to talk a bunch about communication and the responsibilities issue in a moment. Clear roles for sure, really important. Everyone's motivated by the mission of the team. Yeah, and so interesting that you say that. I think a lot of the challenge around prioritization and what to do next and things like that really come back to what are we trying to achieve? What is our mission? What are our goals? How do we actually, given the things that are on our to-do list, which ones are the most important to help us get closer to achieving our goals or our mission? So everyone buys in, uses their strengths. Everyone's paid. Yeah, that's a good one, right? Expecting people to do significant amounts of free work is usually not a winning strategy. Small volunteer amounts we probably all put up with because we're in academic medicine, but at a certain point it crosses a threshold and it's not okay anymore. So clear responsibilities, clear goals and roles. Thank you. This is great. So we're just going to do some high-level reflections on team stuff, and then we're really going to talk about the building the team part. Teamwork and knowledge of teamwork in healthcare really, I think, begins by looking outside healthcare. So aviation, sports teams, the business world, all actually have a much better track record of high functioning teams than does healthcare. We could talk about this for a long time, but there's a lot of science behind a lot of this. And if you pull apart the different components of these teams and ask, why is it that they perform so well? And for example, in the business world, that's actually what Google did. They spent millions of dollars studying teams within Google to try and figure out which were the highest functioning teams, and so that they could make more money and function better as a company. And we know sports teams do the same thing. They think constantly about their team and how are they working together to achieve their goals. So we can learn a lot by looking outside. And if you look at the common elements of teams, these common elements are actually pretty much the same across all of them. And many of them you guys have identified when you think about what the highest performing teams are that you've been part of. Clarity of purpose and design. So why are we here? Why are we a team? What are we trying to achieve? What's our mission, our goals? And is the design of our team actually aligned with that in a way that it's going to succeed or not? A lot of the teams we're part of are not really designed well to achieve their goals. Maybe the right people aren't there. Maybe they don't have the resources or the structure, whatever it might be. Defined roles and responsibilities, a whole bunch of you guys mentioned that, how critical that is. Indeed, it is. Having structured team communication events. So, a lot of teams just work off of ad hoc communication, right? When we realize we need to talk, we try and talk and we try and make it happen. Others say, you know what? Yes, we would like that kind of communication, but we know it's not sufficient. We know we need to actually schedule regular communication events, whether those are meetings or huddles or debriefs, but ways that we can come together and adequately communicate to achieve our work. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about relational coordination. There's this idea of deliberate preparation. So we know as a team, there's certain things we're going to have to do together, whether that's running a meeting or completing a certain task together, whatever it might be. And if you use a sports analogy, Sports teams have the same thing, right? They have to, in certain situations, there's certain things that they need to achieve, and they think about it ahead of time. They write it down, they practice it, they have someone watch them practice it, give them feedback so that they can do better. And that's like in medicine, that's like simulation, right? That's effectively what simulation is. How do we do procedures? How do we coordinate? ACLS is a great example of that, right? When someone has cardiac arrest, we pull out our playbook and we apply ACLS. We don't do that as much as we could, I think, in many other aspects of healthcare. Mindful management is really this idea of situational awareness, strategically selecting what it is you're going to do as a team, and then making sure everyone knows. And then consistent execution. I think in healthcare, we often have pretty low expectations for some of our teams instead of expecting a high level of ongoing performance. So all of these things are part of high-performing teams. The other thing to think about, I think, is that there's sort of a pyramid of escalation of team function. We start at the low level, and in healthcare, hopefully we're all friendly towards each other, although that's not always a given, but we're collegial. Just because we're friendly doesn't mean we're actually working well as a team. We have to also have an intention to cooperate. We have to actually be organized to be able to do it properly. And then we actually have to be doing it reliably. So it's not just, oh, the team worked really well today, but the day before that, it wasn't so great. But actually every day, we're making it as good as possible. And those high levels of team functioning, we expect outside of healthcare all the time, but in healthcare, we're not necessarily delivering that as much for many reasons. So how do we get better? Well, there's been a lot that's been talked about in healthcare about teamwork over the years, and we won't belabor Team Steps. I'm hoping that most of you have heard of it. Team Steps has a long history, came out of aviation actually, and really gives us a lot of the language that we use when we talk about teams. And a lot of Team Steps is learning how to give feedback. For example, you can see under mutual support, part of the tools and strategies there are how do you give feedback, the importance of giving feedback, how do you communicate as a team, how do you make decisions about prioritizing as a team. A lot of the concepts come out of this. There's a link here. There's lots of resources on the web. I'd encourage you to have more of a look. But I think as we've moved along in teamwork, we've realized that it's actually not sufficient to just be thinking about those individual skills and how teams talk with each other, but also really to be thinking about the systems within which teams are functioning. And so Team Steps talks a lot about individual skills and the terms and tools like handoffs and checkbacks and all that sort of stuff. Really valuable, but not sufficient. We actually also need to be thinking about how do we structure our teams, the dynamics within our teams, and the systems that surround them. And relational coordination is really a more evolved or more modern way of thinking about that. We won't get deep into relational coordination, but I'll give you a couple high-level things, and I encourage you to look into it more for those of you that are really looking to build high-functioning teams. So relational coordination comes out of studying industry. Again, Jody Hopper-Gittell wrote this book, The Southwest Airlines Way. She's a professor at Brandeis, and basically studied organizations that had really effective teamwork and came up with a long mouthful of a definition where basically highly interdependent work, like pretty much everything we do in healthcare, is most effectively coordinated through relationships of shared goals, shared knowledge, mutual respect, with sufficiently frequent, timely, accurate problem-solving communication. And so if you apply that definition to the team that you're thinking about in your head today, whatever that might be, and ask yourself, do we have shared goals? Do we have shared knowledge? Do we have mutual respect? Is our communication sufficiently frequent, timely, accurate problem solving? And for the teams that aren't working so well, I'm going to bet that at least one, if not several of those things are not really as good as they could be. And that's actually the root of the problem. And the reason this framework is helpful is it gives you some targets. We can say, well, we actually need to work on our shared goals, or we need to make our communication more frequent, or we need to be sort of more specific when we're communicating, whatever it might be. There's a lot of evidence behind this, and basically they've shown that when those goals are met, it's a nice ecosystem that works well together. When the alternative is the case, it leads to worse outcomes and problems. So if everyone's there for themselves, if they have knowledge they're not sharing, if they don't respect each other, if the communication is infrequent, delayed, inaccurate, or really not problem solving, it's more blame oriented, it leads to problems. There is a ton of evidence about relational coordination. We won't belabor it. These slides I'm happy to share with you. There's some excellent reviews, but it's been studied like super extensively in healthcare and beyond. And the vast majority of studies are strongly supportive of it. And it's been shown to have positive associations with quality, efficiency, experience, et cetera. So again, a framework that as you start to try and diagnose why your teams aren't working well, you might be able to come to this and look at some of those things. So here's where I really want to turn it over. We've got about 20-ish minutes left to really think about how we build and guide teams. So we've got some sort of big frameworks, things to be thinking about, but brass tacks, like how do you actually build your team and how might that help you with your challenges around feedback and managing demands and delegating and ensuring that people feel like they have a role on the team, all the things that you guys brought up. So, but as we do that, I want to just introduce this concept of a difference between managing a team and building a team. Managing team is important. We all, if we're leading a team, we've got to be managing it as well. And that's, we take the team as it is, and we're going to set some goals, objectives, roles, and expectations. We're going to allocate the resources we have. We'll delegate some tasks. We'll monitor performance, give feedback, and we'll solve problems and resolve conflicts. Those are all important things for us to be doing. But building a team is really a conceptual shift. It's a level beyond that. And it's not just assuming that the team is what it is, but it's really critically questioning, is the team actually optimally composed? What are we missing here? If not, could we add something or change something to make the team composition more aligned with what it is we're trying to achieve? Rather than setting the goals, objectives, roles, and expectations, how can we co-design them with the team members? Trish Critic is the Vice Dean for Faculty Affairs. She and I teach together around some of this stuff sometimes, and her phrase is, give the work to the people. And I love that phrase. And I think if we're finding it challenging to be giving other people work, sometimes it's because they weren't part of helping create the decisions around what their roles would be, what their expectations were. They maybe haven't had a chance or a voice to shape that. Because if they have, then they've already come to expect that they're going to get some of that work coming to them at some point. And so this is challenging, but are there ways, I think it's a good question to ask ourselves, are there ways that we could co-design, that we could actually pull people in and say, what do you think our goals should be? What do you think our objectives should be? What role would you like to play? What are the expectations you have for yourself on this team? So we start to have some clarity around those things. Makes it easier to have the conversations about who's doing what work. Because if people don't want to do work, and yet there's going to be a lot of work to do, then we've got to have a conversation about that, and they can actually be part of helping solve that problem, so long as we all have shared interests and goals. So how do we align our resources better? So for example, if we have a long prioritization list, how are we going to actually make sure that we're picking and choosing in ways that align with our mission, vision, and values, rather than just sort of trying to just whack-a-mole here and there? But how do we actually take that step back and say, okay, we got too much to do and too little time. We've got to pick and choose. How are we going to do it in a way that works for us as a team? Attending to relationships and the culture, all really critical. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And then as we give feedback, another frame shift there is to think about how are we supporting people and coaching people to really become the best versions of themselves. And I think that shift on feedback rather, is a really useful one. So rather than telling the person what they're not doing well and what I really think, how can I understand what's important to them, the ways in which they're trying to get better, and how I could add some information or reflections or observations, share that with them so that they are better positioned to achieve what they're already trying to achieve. How can I do that in a supportive and coaching way? Is a different system than I have something really difficult to tell someone and I'm just going to tell them, which is really hard to do sometimes. So this shift between sort of management and building, I think, is a really important one to think about. So we'll open it up now. And I'd encourage you to sort of imagine you're stepping into some sort of leadership role. Maybe it's a team you're on now. You can think about that, or something new you'd like to be part of. You pick whatever type of team it is or the context for it. But how might you go about building out your team's composition, meaning who is on your team? How do you think about doing that? And we're a small group, so no need to raise your hand. You can just unmute and speak up. What's your approach? What's your strategy? And if you don't have one, totally fine too. We'll talk about some of that.
I was trying to think, I feel like in most situations that I'm in, I don't feel a sense of agency about who makes up the team or how. And so whether that's something that I need to shift in my thinking, or whether I need to adapt to working in teams where I can't influence the composition of the team.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. It's a really great reflection. I think all of us, so for example, if we're on clinical service, I don't get to choose which residents are part of my team, right? They're just assigned. That's that. But I think the frame shift that may be helpful is to think about, okay, if the team's not going well, what is happening there? I may not be able to change who's on the team, but at least I can understand and call out and appreciate for myself that part of the challenge is who happens to be on the team right now. And it doesn't mean they're bad people or that there's, they're a problem or something like that. It just means that I'm acknowledging that the composition of the team, for whatever reason it is maybe just not working as well as it could. And we've all been part of clinical teams that just gelled and worked great. And it was like a symphony, right? And we love going to work and the work just gets done and it's fun, it's great. And then there's other ones that are like gears that need more oil and it's creaky and it's just not working, right? So, but being able to name that for yourself and actually developing, I think, that sense of the reason that this is not going well is because the team is not properly composed is actually really valuable because it depersonalizes it and step you back a little bit. And when you do have opportunities to build a team or to grow a team, it gives you a chance to say, well, what do I want here? Because actually, as leaders of teams, you often have some agency, certainly over yourself, but also if it's a project-related team, not a clinic-related team, you often have an opportunity to bring in others or solicit external advice. So what else? Other thoughts from people? And Lindsay, by the way, were you thinking of I sort of jumped ahead there, but were you thinking of a particular context when you thought about that?
I was thinking more about clinical teams, but also, I think if, at least my experience as being sort of new or faculty is that when I'm a part of a research team or an education team or something, but usually I'm not the person who is fixing the composition of the team. So maybe it's me thinking ahead about what it would be like to be a leader in the future, I suppose.
But no, totally. And that's great. And I think one of the things, if you're in that, so for example, if you're part of a research project and somebody's the senior author and they're the one that kind of built the team, is maybe actually as part of developing your own self, and I know I've done this, is go to that senior person who's often an executive sponsor of some sort, or the grant person who wrote the grants or whatever it might be, and just saying, can you tell me a little bit about how you built this team? Like, how did you pick the roles that are on the team? How did you pick the people? And they may have been very intentional about it. And there may be a rhyme to the reason, or maybe not. They may just pick the people because that's who was there that day, or whatever it might be. But that's actually, as a team leader, it is one of the most, when you are building a team, it's one of the most influential things you can do is to pick a good team and to invite people to a team and to call out when something's missing from the team. It's one of the few opportunities as a leader to really shape the way the work is going to happen. So it's, even if you can't change it right now, it's good to develop an awareness around it. Anybody else? Other things? Amy.
I think I've learned through lots of bias training that often, firstly, people who raise their hand fast to always be on the team aren't always who you want your team to be made up of. And there's people in the room that you need to look deep into the dark corners to make sure you're inviting and thinking about everybody whose voice you really do want to hear on your team. And so coming from schools, we'd be like, oh, you have the same group of high functioning people always on the same teams isn't really the best way to move forward when there's a lot of voices that aren't being heard and a lot of people who do great on teams that just haven't been given the chance yet. So you kind of have to open your mind to who is your team.
Amy, that's beautiful. I love the way you said that. I can't say it any better. I totally agree. Just those who are loudest or most prominent or step up first may not, they may be important members of teams, but there are a lot of other people who have a lot to offer, and we probably have to look a little harder for those. Other thoughts about how we build teams? Yeah, Mike.
Thanks, Lauge. This may be more about me than general rules for building teams, but the few times I've had the chance to build a team, I've learned the hard way that having at least one other person who's willing to get work done, to actually work in between meetings, at least one. So, maybe some of the composition can be just people who offer great perspectives and ideas and things, but there needs to be a minimum of one other human who's going to do work, or else it, for me, and again, it may be what I'm bringing or not bringing in terms of delegation skills and motivation skills, but that's worked for me.
No, totally, Mike. That's a great point. We're all very much, we're all probably aspirational and accomplished and go-getters in our own way, right? That's how we got to be here today, right? That's our path. And yet, if we take it all on ourselves, it doesn't always work well. So yeah, I think that's part of it. And it's actually a great lead-in to really this concept. This is how I think about it for whatever it's worth. I ask myself, who do we need to help get the work done? Really, to your point, Mike, is like, this is the work that we're trying to achieve, and who do we need on our team to actually do that? And it's going to be a variety of people. So let's think about who those people might be. But part of that's maybe people who actually can get work done and not just show up and offer their ideas and thoughts, but then not do any work outside the meeting. So depending on the type of team you're part of, there's some key people that you kind of always have to think about. Sort of executive sponsor is a very businessy term, but it really is the idea of who's the senior person who controls resources and works at an organizational level or in the local context level to make decisions. Who's the project leader? And that might be you a lot of the time. And are there content experts that you need? So if it's a QI project, if it's a research project around a certain area, if it's education around a certain topic, those might be people that you need. And depending on the size of the team, you may have a very small team or you may have a very large team. So sometimes people cover multiple roles, but I think just thinking about these roles at some point is really important. And even if that executive sponsor isn't there at all the meetings, they know that you have this team and they support you having this team. And when you have a problem, you can go to them to try and help get things solved. So that's part of why they're important. And then there's just stakeholders, depending on the nature of the work you're doing. In an academic environment, medical environment, it's often one of, some or more than one of these groups here. But just thinking about, do we have good stakeholder group representation? Those are sort of the beginnings. And then there are a lot of different considerations as you build a team. People who are really good at building teams think about every single one of these, and you probably don't know that they're doing it because this is part of their inner work, or they work with a couple close people that help them think through this. But they're people who really put their mind to this spend a lot of time thinking about specifically who we invite in, who we bring into the team. And like we've been talking about, being inclusive, making sure everyone's voices or all the voices that are out there are being represented or shared is really important. Having diverse perspectives. Are people going to be available and engaged, right? Are they actually going to show up to meetings? And are they going to get stuff done when we ask to get stuff done? And when they disagree, are we going to be able to be constructive? And do we have the influence we need? There are a lot of different things to be thinking about, and we could dive more into those if there are specific questions. But that concept of influence, I think, is one that I wanted to call out. And that's a little bit around terminology here, which is that leadership, at least for me, this is how I conceptualize these terms. Leadership is really this process of mobilizing people to address problems, to help get work done, and to help people move through the unfamiliar. Authority is something that many of us don't have, actually. I know I certainly don't on the teams that I'm part of. It's not like I'm hiring or firing people, right? I don't have that kind of authority. I don't have sort of an official title necessarily. I don't have power in that way. But what we all do have and can grow is influence. And that's this capacity to have an effect on others. And you don't need to have authority. A lot of influence comes from the statements that start with, I wonder if, or could you help me understand why, or those sorts of things where you are guiding and helping facilitate conversations and awareness and decisions that do affect teams. And really that's our opportunity, I think, is to grow our influence, to become more effective team leaders in a lot of ways, at least in lieu of having authority where we can just tell people what to do, which most of us don't have. So so maybe some useful concepts to separate out. So another question for you all, and we've got about 7 minutes left, so we won't spend too long on this, but what other questions are coming up for you as you build teams? And in particular, is there anyone that's been missing from your teams? And if so, how could you engage them? And again, this is outside of the clinical context, probably, most likely, where we can actually control a little bit more on who's part of teams and who we're engaging. But any other things that come up for you around building teams? And no worries if not, totally okay. Something in the chat, let's see. Do they have the time? Yeah, thanks, Ermias, I agree. that is one of the big problems. And I think Mike's saying essentially the same thing, and Lindsay, you too, and people don't show up to meetings, right? So do people have time? And there are a lot of different ways to handle that. One of them is actually to just ask them directly that question. Say, to be part of this team, for us to be effective in getting our work done, we need people to show up and to do some work. Is that something you can commit to? And if not, that's okay, we understand, but then we'll go look for someone who can. Right? And it's not, it's not a personal something, it's just we're not actually going to be able to achieve what we're here to achieve. Now, if you have a limited pool of people and there's just not that many people to pick from, then it gets more complicated. And then maybe you have to think about ways to free up some of their time, or really find ways to shift work so that they can still provide their input, but the work gets done in some other way. This is where funding often comes in, and extra funding, extra support can often help manage time-consuming tasks that would otherwise be difficult for someone to do. So it does get trickier that way, but oftentimes just having that upfront conversation can be really helpful, because if the person really believes strongly in the work and they understand how much you're going to need their help to get it done, how much they need to be contributing, sometimes they are able to shift how they're prioritizing something. So, all right, so we'll move on, but feel free to throw other things in the chat or unmute if there are questions. So one of the things that often comes up in this team building process is people say, well, how do I know if I've engaged enough stakeholders or have enough buy-in? And there's not really a quick answer to that, other than that's part of why you want to have diverse perspectives on your team. You want to make sure that you've done that as you're building your team. And the issue of buy-in really is about when you don't have buy-in, when people are resisting or they're tugging against what you're trying to get them to do. It's sort of a tug of war, is really understanding why. Why are they resisting doing whatever it is that you're hoping that they would do? And really engaging them and asking them directly around that in an open-minded sort of way, where we're not sort of loading a response and ready to shoot down whatever they're saying, but really just open-mindedly trying to understand why they might be resisting. And one of the concepts here is this idea of constructive conflict and orchestrating that, actually trying to surface it so that we can talk about it rather than avoid it. We actually are often able to move through it more effectively that way. I won't belabor this too much. It really is one of the resources later, but as you are leading teams, we've talked about team steps, we've talked about relational coordination. Another framework that may be helpful for you is Cotter's 8-step change management framework. Some of you, I think, have seen me talk about this or heard me talk about it. I won't belabor it today, but this whole topic of how do you build a team, that's really number 2 in this framework. It's building that guiding coalition, which is just another fancy word for team. So there's a lot that comes around building the team when you are leading somebody through change or through a team project that is really important to be thinking about. And on the slide that I'll share later, there's some links to resources where you can learn more about this. There's a bunch of different ways we teach about it here at UW Medicine. So in our last couple minutes here, I just wanted to leave you with some ideas about ways to become a better team leader, some of which we've kind of talked about here, others you may want to take with you. So those 5 things are seeking out training and skill development, learning about who you are, leaning into leadership, doing some reflection, and the concept of respect and why that's so critical. So we'll just quickly touch on each of these in just kind of a flyby fashion. So upcoming in this certificate development program, Mo Hagman's talking about running meetings. I think it's May 5th or May 3rd if the date hasn't been changed for some reason. Mo's awesome. Running meetings is really critical. I encourage you to attend it if that's something you want to learn about. The UW Medicine Office of Faculty Affairs, run by Trish Critic, has a fantastic website around faculty development resources, specifically around leadership. I encourage you to go check it out. Trish also puts out the Thrivecast podcast, and there are lots of leadership and team leadership related things out there. There's like 40 podcasts by now that she's produced, and you can download them from wherever you get your podcasts. I've listed some of them here. And so, Lady, for example, you mentioned how to give feedback. There's actually a 2-part series on how to do that. So I'd encourage you to have a listen to that. I think it's with Addie McClintock, and so Adelaide McClintock. And so I think that's a really great resource for all of us. I often listen to them in my car when I'm driving somewhere, like to go ski or something. And they're pretty quick. They're usually like 20 or 25 minutes. And then the Department of Medicine's actually been developing some faculty development stuff as well, and has a similar kind of resource as the Office of Faculty Affairs. So that's resources for you to develop your skills and stuff. Learning about who you are as a person and leader. You guys have already done this a lot. I could tell by your self-assessments of your conflict management and personality and all that stuff. If you want to do more, there's more stuff out there. These links will be in the slides that we hand to you. Oftentimes having a mentor or a coach is one of the most effective ways, and through this certificate program and many others in DGIM, hopefully you have good access to that. And if not, please feel free to reach out and I can try and help with that. Leaning into leadership, I think there's really no substitute for real world experience. You gotta, if someone offers, you know, I've talked with some of you about this before, but when there are leadership roles, like take them, try them, you know, say yes. And if it's a bit of a stretch or a challenge, that's great. I think the networking piece is really important. That is a lot of how leaders survive and grow and learn, is that they connect with other leaders and they talk about their challenges. Say no to imposter syndrome. If you feel like you're not quite ready, you probably are, and I'm happy to hype you up if you want to meet and chat. The intentional and iterative reflection, I think, is really critical. You got to be really clear why you're choosing to be a leader, and your intentions in that regard, I think, really matter. This combination of structured learning, things like this, as well as other faculty development, plus real work practice, plus mentoring and coaching, can't be beat. It's really a powerful combination that really shoots your leadership way up. So if you're missing one of those pieces of that equation, happy to chat about ways to try and fill that in. And then taking care of yourself. It's hard to be an effective leader if you're struggling with something yourself. We all have life happen to us, so it's a normal thing, but just what can you do to take care of yourself to be more present and effective as a leader? Really important to think about. And then lastly, respect. And, you know, this Maya Angelou quotation, I think, really matters for team leadership. People won't remember what you said or did exactly, but they're definitely going to remember how you made them feel. Really important to think about. You want to be someone that people would work with again. And how can you do that? I think making sure that your team has some psychological safety and is focused on that common shared goal is one really powerful way. And then just finding ways to protect and support your team. They'll remember that. If you're looking out for them, if something bad happens and you're there to support them and help them, really powerful. So that's our summary for today. I'll ask you if you have a chance, thanks for sticking on. I know we're a minute past here, but there's one thing you're going to take away from today, or two things, feel free to put in more. Just what would that be? What is something you might take away? And this will help us for our next year as we're trying to make sure this session is useful for folks. And we'll sort of leave it here. And while you're filling that out, if there's any questions or anything else you want to add to today's conversation, please feel free to chime in. Otherwise, I know we're past the hour and I'm sure everyone's got lots of things to go and do. Be thoughtful about team composition. That's great. I hope I know I harped on it a lot. And again, it's not always an opportunity, but when it is, or at least to reflect on it, even if you can't change it, is really helpful. Aware of situations with a leader, more intentional about building teams. Yeah, the composition piece. And yeah, be thoughtful about why it isn't working instead of just dealing with it. Yes, I think the more that you can diagnose it, the easier it becomes to disconnect and then manage it. Meaning disconnect, meaning make it not personal. So, and team members who are doers, yeah, at least a few. Totally agree. You need some doers around us for sure. So again, thank you guys all for your thoughts and participation today. Really appreciate it. There is a feedback form. I think Daniela put it in the chat. If you have a moment to fill it out, it'd be great. Again, we're always looking to improve these sorts of things and make them more useful for you. So if there's something that would have been better or different for you, just tell me and we'll work on it for next time. So thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. Have a great day.